um, logistically, I just want to make sure that we know that we do have a caption. This is caption on the bottom. And if you did want to make your screen larger, on the top right corner, you can click and make it larger. You can make it larger that way. If there's any struggle technology-wise, go ahead and ask your question, and the staff will help you resolve your issue. Okay? Thank you. Go ahead. Bye-bye. Okay, before I go ahead, I have two things, questions and answers. And some I can take a look at and answer, and some I'll have to put on hold until the end of the presentation, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Secondly, I'm pretty fast signer, a communicator. If you need me to slow down, just go ahead and ask me to slow down. I'll be more than happy to do that. Other than that, I'm very excited to be able to offer this opportunity and the concept of violence, oppression, and how we play a role and a part of it. We'll move along, and once we're good, and if we're ready, is everybody ready? Just make sure you can see me clearly. I just want to make sure everyone is good to go and has access. It is a little slow. Malibu, just keep it slow. Very good. For now, the PowerPoint, and we'll use, and it's an overview of what we'll expect this hour and a half to be. It'll really be about an hour and 15 minutes, maybe an hour and 10 minutes. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions if you have any. The overview, we will start off with the guidelines and what I expect from the guidelines. And I'll introduce myself. I'll introduce some of the terminology, the important words we need to know before we move on in the presentation. Violence within the deaf community, expanding on oppression, expanding more of the complex, working in domestic violence and sexual violence, and it still can apply some of the information there. And as I work as a, what are my opportunities? Where are my power? What are my influences from the oppressor? I'll expand on that. And then more food for thought and how it affects. And then it'll be the end of the webinar. And then we'll have a question and answer session. And we'll have resources at the end to share. Some people can't see my video. Please hold. I want to make sure everyone can see me okay. I'm located in Austin. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and move on. And if you can't see me, you can take a look at the captionist because the captioner seems to see me. Maybe it's a little choppy, and if it doesn't work, we can speak to the people who are responsible. I'm going to go ahead. The guidelines are very important. I do rules and policies and expectations. I feel like we should have a guideline to make sure we're all on the same page. Make sure we're safe. Is this a safe place to have a discussion? These are sensitive issues for many people who are oppressed. Violence. And so the three pieces in the guidelines are be respectful and mindful of your comments. If you feel like you want to make a comment and you don't realize, please be mindful that your comments may affect other people. So you need to take accountability for your own actions because your comments may hurt. At any time, you feel triggered or you feel like you're not sure what to do, or you can't handle the information or it's overwhelming, please leave and take care of yourself. And that's fine to do. It's very important to in this field, correct? It's very important. Thank you. I will introduce myself. I'm one of 5 deaf children. I have no idea where I'm from. People say, "Where are you from?" And I can't answer. I have no idea. Sorry, this is the interpreter. I would say I'm multiracial. I grew up with in a strong, very deaf culture, deaf school I was raised in. And so I grew up, my identity was, I was oppressed until grad school. And it was easy for me to focus on my oppression, for example, being deaf. And I did have power and privilege, and I would analyze myself and how the influence they had on me and my power. And I received my master's degree from Gallaudet University, and now I work right now deaf shared deaf survivors healing through getting through an advocacy and a responsiveness and empowerment. Safe place to stop abuse here in Austin. I've worked almost 3 years now, and I became an educator and a full-time online educator, and I can explain why. I grew up in a deaf family. I have my last name. I'm very well known. My sister, my mom, and my dad. And that became a barrier for many deaf survivors who want to help but are not comfortable because of confidentiality issues. And I recognize that as my role, and I became more of an educator and more community based, killed two birds with one stone. I love to get out in the community to make changes. And it's not just meeting with individuals, I can make more of an impact. I've presented and I've given many workshops. People who know me, I'm very shy, timid, but then after grad school, in this field, I did understand that I have power and privilege. Being an educated woman, I had a master's degree. I, I learned, I went ahead, I'm sorry. Oh, I presented as a total amount to, a large group and small group, workshops of oppression and violence. Terminology that we have to be familiar with before we move ahead with this PowerPoint. Some of you may already know, but you can go ahead and review, and that's fine. And I will use this for the rest of the presentation. Deaf, blind. It's inclusion. Many in the deaf community, it's not a broad term where it's all inclusive. They use that term. Secondarily, they use DV, SV. It is for domestic and sexual violence. And I use those terms. Oppression is the state of being subjected to an unjust treatment or control. Could be expansive, domestic violence, but the oppression itself. Privilege. Some people sign it this way, some people sign it this way. I'm more comfortable signing it privilege. A person would have more advantage than others, and we'll talk more on that later. Intersectionally, I realize that there are some people that asked a deaf woman, which is your identity? Which do you identify yourself as? And my identity is which one? I don't know. And so that's the intersectionality. Everyone has a different way to identify themselves. And we'll speak more on that later with survivors. As I mentioned, I'm a counselor, educator. There's a whole spectrum of different types of survivors. And they've shared their experiences with me. And no one is exactly the same. I've learned as survivors, it's not easy because of the family, the community, and the systems. It's not easy to be a survivor. So I'd like to touch upon some of the experiences that are similar for the deaf and deafblind and people with disabilities in general.
Okay.
Violence within the deaf community, survivors in general.
I'm trying to think of, I think I have some, but I feel like I'm
The statistics I've seen.
All right.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Look at it. I can't, the captioner. I don't hear you. Terps are back. Oh, okay. Back. We're good. Green light. Yes. Okay. Deaf, deaf blind, deaf disabled, and I've already explained them. It's a double or more barriers for those people. For example, am I a survivor? Did I have experience with violence, domestic violence, sexual violence? Worked with them one-on-one, then real and reported to the parole officer. And from my experiences, there were barriers there. And in the community, I would help and go through to get through the barriers that they are experiencing. A person who is deaf or deaf-blind, or they have more of the barriers, triple barrier of the barriers, quadruple of the barriers. It depends on, it's everything that the person has, and then including the domestic violence or the violence. It's important on one level where people can meet as an agency, or the police officers or people can meet with them in the community. And that's why I mentioned that community base is so important for me, because once I get the community open, then the survivors can, there's a barrier that's removed. Oftentimes survivors typically feel like that they can't share their stories, and they do share their stories, and they feel frustrated where no one believes them, or they feel like no one believes them. And they feel isolated and they're not sure what to do. And they still, there will be mental health issues, and I can expand on that. And in Austin, Texas here, there's over 60,000 deaf people within the Austin metro area. So we're one agency, and we've been contacted. And we're 1 out of 3 that services the whole area. And the numbers don't match. We're not there to meet all of their needs. We recognize how we can do things a little bit differently within social media to spread awareness and be more creative with our work. And we recognize that there are still barriers for access to our service. We did have from some people from Waco, Dallas, Houston, San Marco, and different places that could help us with clients, but places that were more rural, there were barriers. In Austin, it's nice because there are more services, and we can talk on that later. Any questions?
Unfortunately, I can't see any feedback here, so I'm trying to get used to just signing to myself. Another common tactics that we noticed, or statistics that we experienced here, are that looking at the abuser or the perp's behaviors. Sometimes it's not intentional, but the idea is to make is that person, you know, hurting you or taking advantage of you? And the question is, did they hurt me, or did you, in the survivor mode, the idea is that really the abuser? And it gets complicated, especially in the deaf community. I'll say I'm a survivor. I'm going through that. If I hurt someone else, I'm now an abuser. And then the idea is that there's a survivor abuser cycle. And the deaf community is so small, so it's so tiny. and it gets very complicated. And the idea is there's a label of you're an abuser, and you're the perp, and you're a survivor, and it's not always just a one-way street. It's very difficult. It gets more complex than that. So how we, deal with that, and how do we change that? Um, we did some training in regards to some of these issues and realized we typically focus on labels. You are the abuser, for example, and and we need to focus on behaviors. Obviously, there's, with survivors' permissions, of course, getting this information. However, the idea here is, trying to get acceptance, and the idea is our goal here is for to be safety in the community, and the idea is to meet our clients' needs. And there's a whole lot of things that are changing, and we make this more transformational. Thirdly, the idea is it's not as effective as it should be or could be, but the idea is regarding survivors, looking at commonalities and experience survivors have. That people are saying, I'm fine and I'm okay, but the idea is that there's some frustration where other people, maybe within that family, don't want them to do something for them. For example, the idea here is there harassment that occurs between people? Does the survivor have any challenges? And the idea is we can't always have, there's violence that occurs. And this is the interpreter. It's very difficult to see some of this, so I apologize. Um, but again, there's the idea of there's a feeling of resistance, and sometimes there's acting out. And the idea is we want to help the community as a whole heal. Sometimes it's not as effective as it could be, and the idea is how does this deaf community run? How do these domestic violence agencies come together and have these discussions about community accountability? And we can have this discussion here, and we have a more effective solution for those survivors in those centers. The belief here is, we want to make sure that this is a deeply rooted thing within society. There's always a blaming. Did something occur that caused it? Is it their fault? Is there a different relationship issues? There's a common discounting that occurs. But our key focus is more on the intervention focused pieces, more than prevention focus. And that's the whole point here. For example, rather than, there's the whole idea of counseling and support when things already had happened. We want to do that, of course, but plus look at prevention focused. And this is working. Working, for example, with K to 12 children. What does that look like? How does that occur? And how does that dialogue happen? How interactive is it? Do we work with them on this intervention focus? What age do we start and progress forward and have that in them? So when, the idea of, hurting somebody, they know they don't because they've learned this at a young age, and it's prevention. And then we can get, maybe we can help that healing process happen more quickly as well. If you do need intervention focused services, they're there, but the idea is focusing on prevention, and we can see a reversal and reduce in violence. We're trying to shift our focus here. Obviously, we're going to have those prevention focused services, but we would like to focus on what can we do as an agency to be more preventative and have that strategy in place. Let's look at intersectionality. It's a new concept. Well, it may be new for the deaf community, so we want to recognize that. The idea here is that, very deaf pride, is the interpreter doing okay? Okay, very deaf pride, deaf power, deaf identity. Is that wrong? No, it's just that some people have more strong feelings on deaf and their own image and their own self. And the idea is, who decides what sort of identity fits that person and how you feel for that intersectionality? It's a very complex issue. There's a lot going on here. If you want to have, there's different social identities as well in regards to ethnicity and gender or sexual orientation and the like. There's a whole lot of them. Religion, upbringing, beliefs. There's so much in this intersectionality that's occurring. How do we perceive these differences and how do we experience that when impact happens with violence or oppression or different things that are occurring? And that's where we're going to look at this intersectionality. What we have to understand here is that with intersectionality, no one's exactly the same. You may have some similarities with others, but the idea is it's not exactly the same as others. Maybe, um, oh yeah, their immigrant status is different than mine, or we're both from Mexico, for example. Are we the exact same experiences? No, they're not. There's different backgrounds and diversities. The idea is also I'd like to work with there's a diverse population of people here. For example, how do you experience, how do they view the world? How do I use that intersectionality to understand them, where they're coming from, and work with them effectively? Okay, let's look at survivors and their intersectionality. The statistics on this are higher when one or more of these identities are a minority, if you will. For example, female, LGBTQIA, a person of color, additional disabilities, level of education, mental health status, accessibility to services or transportation. 1 second. Okay. So if there's a barrier that's occurring or there's oppression that's occurring and there's a violence that is experienced, that intersectionality is impacted and it's influencing on that person's experience and what they bring into that experience. And then the more the barriers, the more that experience can happen. That statistics are showing that. For example, let's say that a deaf woman will experience violence. 1 in 4 deaf women will experience violence. So there's also the idea that 1 in 2 may experience violence with a different sort of person. Oh, if a woman's in a wheelchair, she'll be 1 in 1. Almost 100% of that will experience some sort of violence. There's the more additional pieces you have, the more marginalized the group, the more higher the statistics are that you'll experience this. And also, how do they receive access to those resources? Transposition, interpreting services, counseling services. There's so many barriers. And what are they going to experience? You have to live in their shoes, if you will, and work that way. There's all these snakes here, and the idea is their intersectionality and how that works with the world. And so, no survivor you'll meet will be exactly the same as anybody else or have similar experiences of how that abuser hurt them. But we want to focus on how that survivor experiences things. There's no one going to be exactly the same. There's about 35 different ranges of identities, whether it's ethnicity, background, age, etc. Again, no one's exactly the same. Maybe someone will be similar, but there'll be some differences. How are people responding? How do they heal from that experience? How do they recover? How do they struggle to heal? How do they get back in the community? What struggles do they experience because of that intersectionality? So I'm wondering, I'd like to ask you all, see if you can answer this question. How does this intersectionality of a survivor impact and influence the healing experience with domestic violence facilities like ours? And please key your answers in and type them in. I'd like to see what your thoughts are. Please type them into the chat section. Well, the cultural view, right. Each survivor has their own way of, for example, there's culture, traditions. Yes, The idea is being supportive, but many, they're looking at the healing process here. They may do great with counseling and work very well, but at the same time, there's a frustration because there's no systems in place. Or some people are on their own. Some people are given up on, if you will, and so the idea is that they don't want to be there. They are enabling behaviors there, and so there's a whole different concept of this. There's some things that are very different with domestic violence issues. So we'd be very very supportive of this and how things will affect their healing experience. Does anyone else have any else comments? Okay, not hearing anything else, we can add more later, of course, and we can add that in the Q&A at the end of this.
I, I sign oppression this way. Really, it's a more complicated issue than that. Oppression, it really, I love the idea of a person pushing down on that person because the intersectionality person is a person with power is hurting the person they're oppressing. In the same way, they're hurting someone else. Someone who experiences violence, because that's how it works. Once you're oppressed, you'll turn around and oppress somebody else. Oppression itself comes from privilege, and it is passed on down, and it's throughout history. Let me give you an example. A woman back in history, was not often in a classroom, but I learned in the past, in my youth, institutionally, as babies, without women within the world would stop. As we from BC into AD, we've learned the oppression of women. Women were being used. They were being raped and stolen from. They were being destroyed. Is that oppression? That was oppression from a long time ago. Today, the things we do and the things we say have all the context of the history rooted into our view on women. Domestic violence is tied into that, but still, the oppression is complex. It's never going to go away. We become aware of it. We become aware of our actions based on history. We need to recognize that, and we need to stop with what we say. All oppression is tied into ethnicity. Oppression happens in the community. There is a variety of oppressions. All are interconnected. Please take a look at everything. Know that everything is connected, and know that oppression is a very layered approach. It's not one person just oppressing another. There's many more layers. Individuals, groups, societies, universal. The oppression takes place on all levels. Oppression, why must we understand what it includes? Why must we learn about it? And what can we change so that we can change the understanding of oppression? We have to apply understanding and equity, that it's not just equality of what we all, if we take a look and there are pictures, I'll have visual examples of equity and quality and how they differ. And I'll explain more of that with more visual explanations, because American Sign Language is very visual. And to understand that power and privilege is everyday life. Privilege for myself, for example, I'm straight. I grew up. I looked in a mirror and I saw myself. I saw my skin. I am a female. I am deaf. When I would go out into the community, I knew that I'm a deaf female. And people would look at me and I may be oppressed because of my identity, but I did not understand that that being straight was a privilege. But I did then realize and recognize and become more aware of how I played into society by looking in a mirror. I did not see beyond the oppression. I did not understand that I was privileged. I did not earn the opportunity. I was born with it. I became more and more mindful of different forms of oppression. Power struggle. Power struggles there were some that were very obvious, some that were very minimal, but really, it is a power struggle. It's there in the workplace, in school, in education, just at a regular grocery store. There are power struggles everywhere. Some it's not very clear, and some it is very clear. And how can we be more and become more of an ally and an advocate? The difference is, allies, that means I'm not a member of that particular community or group, but I support them. But know that if I can't identify, I can't be in that community, they can call me an ally, but I can't label myself as an ally. That's something I can't do. The community must see me and label me as an ally. An advocate means that I'm a member of that group, and I also, of course, advocate for them. Women's rights and the like. Deaf rights, I'm a member of that group, thus I'm an advocate. So then how can I become more effective? How can I take a look at my privilege and see what I have, and I can see my impact and my influence? It's a journey, it's a humble journey. We're programmed. The journey is a lifelong journey. It's an ongoing every day. It may be tiring. I need a break. I need to take a step back. And it's a very healing process. It is a lifelong journey. And thinking about oppression, what it means to prevent the possibility of prevention within a workplace, or if I'm working in the deaf community or a deaf survivor or a deaf-blind survivor and working with that person, and the oppression can take place, we have to really be more, if we're not mindful, we can do more damage than good. We have to be accountable and know and deal with the community, have sensitivity within that group. We need to emphasize and to learn the differences within the community. I really love this picture. It's very clear. What equality looks like, where there are 3 boxes that are given and they're equal and they're given to everybody the same. Equity, there needs to be more for certain individuals and less for others. The goal is liberation, of course, but we start with an understanding of equality, equity, and then we'll transition into liberation. Power, privilege, they're labeled. It's just like an umbrella, if you will. Within oppression and domestic violence, there are 2 notes here. The possibility to get what you want, and that's power. I can drive, for instance. If I'm in the mood Or I can go to McDonald's, I can hop in a car and go. And I can order, but I have a barrier. And so what I do to overcome that barrier is when I order, I can use paper and pen. It's not like hearing people, but I can get what I want. I do have, I can get what I want without thinking about it. I know I can get what I want, or I can walk in and I got to think of a bus schedule. I don't have to think of a bus schedule. I have the power that I can get what I want. Privilege is not if a person is invisible. It's unearned power that a person is born into or acquires over their lifetime. And they can get more power with privilege. So to go back to power, secondarily is power with is power to make decisions for a person without really checking in with that person and see what they want. And it's more of communicating and understanding. It's power with empathy. And that's the idea. Rather than me just deciding for them what they need. And we can make, like making big decisions with finances, for instance, with workshops, themes, whatever, not checking in. Is this what you want? Is this what you need? I can check in so I have power over them and encourage them to practice more involvement, inclusion, so they can have power as well. Privilege is very common, and I spoke on a few workshops and trainings and the like, and I recognized that people weren't comfortable talking about with white privilege because the quality, taking ownership, making decisions for me, and it becomes a very, within the system and the society, it's easy, it's integrated to get what we want. We can use our power over a person. Remember, power over or power with, that's the difference. So I'm curious, I need to ask you, Tara, would you mind adding some of your comments, and how does privilege play in the role for the people of the deaf, deafblind, and deaf with disabilities? Because I'm going to let Tara jump in for a second.
Hi, this is Tara. Can you see me? Thank you. Thank you so much for so much of your comments. I thought a lot of things. I've actually made some notes here during your presentation that I want to share. Yeah, I'll go ahead and go off. Okay, one second here. Okay, here's Tara. Okay, someone asked me a question. How does power and privilege play out in the domestic violence, sexual violence field as me being an advocate? In what way do I use my power and privilege during my work? You know, I experienced oppression as a deaf woman, so I was thinking about this, and I typed a few situations. First of all, I want to say yes, it's true. As a white person, I remember very, very clearly some time ago. This is prior to me starting this discussion and this dialogue. I don't see color, for example. I said those words. I treat everyone exactly the same. I thought that way. I thought that was correct. I thought that that was the right understanding. I was right. Everyone's treated the same. And through my work with Deaf Hope, I realized that, wow, how wrong, how really, truly wrong I was. Because, as a person's identity and how they experience oppression affects how people view them, how they experience violence, where services are received or not received. I realize that as I comment on this and say I don't see color or I don't see disabilities, I think we're all the same. That means that I'm overlooking so many critical components of a person's experience, their identity, their journey through life. I'll give you an example here that really was an impact on me as an advocate. There's one time a family, as a deaf mother, the woman of color herself was referred to Deaf Hope. And to me specifically, through the court system. Meaning that the courts had power and ordered her to do something because she experienced some sort of domestic violence. Um, she put her children in danger because they did not leave this abusive partner. Um, that's the situation. So the mandate was you must take a parental class with Deaf Hope, and we were to teach her about domestic violence. She understood, and once she did, she could have her kids back. They were taken from her. So that's where we're at. And I was in a position of quite a bit of power. Now, this woman of color, different culture, had to quote unquote, um, her future of her children and her children's future were dependent on me and Deaf Hope. It was a very difficult position for me to be with because I wanted to be here to support the survival the whole way through. At the same time, let's say I did not provide the parent classes. I don't want to be, I don't want to be part of the court system, if you will, the legal system. Where do they go? There's no other option for her in ASL. Nothing. I felt a little bit turned on the inside, actually, because I had to write a letter with my evaluation notes of a deaf mother. Was she an adequate mother? Did she meet my class expectations? And submit that information to the court system. So I was in a position of lots of power. I think very often as an advocate, we oftentimes find ourselves connecting with the system, if you will. Oh, and your video froze, Tara. I can't see anything. Okay, rather than this particular situation. So I did the best I could to include the survivor through this entire process. Every step of the way of the curriculum, open dialogue, discussions, do you agree, do you disagree, having those conversations, and then writing a letter together with that person to submit to the courts. As best as I could navigate through this very complex issue. I think that what's important for me as a white person in a professional position of employment, regardless if I'm trying to interact with somebody, there's a perception of that person. They're going to see me as having more power because in that situation, I could have decided to say, you know what? You can't get your kids, or I would be that person. And the idea was I have to be open and transparent and honest about the entire process. I'm thinking of a laundry list of things I'm going to hold off to, but I'm going to pack this back to you. Let me see my notes here and see if I've missed anything. I think the idea is being mindful of how we use our privilege and our power in our various situations when we're advocating. So, there you go. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was great to watch your story. Really, that really impacted me in so many different levels. Because, really, it's there's the idea of color. Where seeing where you grew up. Oh, we're the same. We're both this. We're both deaf. We're the same. We're actually not. It's deeper than just that. Or there's the idea of the opportunity of seeing color. How do we interact with each other? Um, it will affect each other. And there's so many layers here, and it's very, very impactful. Um, there's a position of power as a counselor with my client. The idea is they come in my office. I always want to, have them have a conversation with me, and the idea is we're having dialogue. But I'm always very mindful. You know, for example, what do I want to wear? Because obviously they want to see me in a position of power. What do I look like? How does that impact or affect our relationship? How do we, what do we do if they're in your position? As a mother with children, that's, I'm making a decision based on systematic systems. So it's a difficult position to be in. But while you really hit home for me on how I use my power in my role and how I want to see more of that sort of in various agencies, where we could really sit down with our clients and that person and engage them and dialogue them, on a whole number of different levels, not just professional servicing somebody, but on many different levels. And how can this, I don't want to exclude anybody from a program. Thank you so much for sharing that, Tara. I really appreciate it. I encourage you all to start thinking about any examples. How do your power and privilege play a part, on your one-on-ones and how we do as an agency slash organization. Is there idea that could there be agency oppression? Is there power issues, power over people? Those sort of things. The idea is we can expand on that, or we can wait for the Q&A section. But I'd like to have a dialogue with the group and have more of this maybe next time. But the idea is whatever we're all most comfortable doing at this point in time. Okay, let's look at this. Working in a domestic and sexual violence field. I've got really three different positions I'm working in. All of them are different experiences. I'm going to court. I've done that. I'm advocating. I'm helping. I'm looking for. I'm also counseling. I'm approaching these people, trying to assist in other ways. And then I'm looking at the administration in regards to any barriers. How do they work through certain pieces? There's a whole variety of experiences. You could work as a financial piece. There's a board. There's an advisory member. There's a community member. There is the court member. There's a variety of different positions that you work into the domestic violence, sexual violence field. Are you working directly or indirectly, with the domestic violence, sexual violence work? If you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear some thoughts if you'd like to share. What are your experiences like in this field? And also, do you recognize things that are happening? Or or do you recognize it after the fact? Or, is there any oppression that's happening? I guess, if I could always add my perspective and my experience as well, but anyone else want to share? Okay, hearing nothing or seeing no comments. Okay, that's fine. I'll go ahead and go on myself. I know it's 4 o'clock right now, my time. Um, so I want to be mindful of our timelines here. So we have 30 minutes left. Oh, I see something here. You want to expand on your experiences of how that's happening? Okay, seems like there's no one commenting. Oh, hold on. Okay, I see kind of an incomplete thought as someone's typing. Yeah, I believe there's still typing occurring. Okay, since this person took the position as the deaf buying counselor, oh, we work together. Um, took this position. There's a number of deaf buying people have increased, and the challenges here faced are there's some people have more privilege than clients they're working with. I have access to vision. I have access to language. Some of my clients struggle with that, and they have struggle with ASL. Rachel Parker states, I see this all the time, but at some point, there's an impact on the services I work with my client. Can they write well on English, for example? Um, and maybe they want to have an interpreter at the meeting. And so there's a person from a different country, for example. Maybe English isn't their first language, so it impacts me as a deaf person as well. Yes, most. Okay, I'm with it. I have a deaf family. I have communication access. I have employment. I'm trying to assist and have a conversation by, I want to be helpful. This is regards to privilege because, I can't, I have that privilege. That's who I am as that deaf person. But there's a privilege there. Can I change that perspective? No. But what can we do? How can we look at this? I wanted to get a CDI for a specific client, but the struggle was that we have, I don't want, sorry, it's hard to see her now. I've got different experiences of violence, and I didn't realize that there was this violence occurring and this was happening. I used my sighted privilege in my college background. It could be quite a challenge because when you put this all into one mix and try to provide access for these people, there can be additional barriers created. The reason why is they see me as a person of color and deafblind, and I sign. I can't see where you're at emotionally and where you are in life. I try to have a team of deaf staff to bounce ideas off of. And when we don't, we have the staff here, which is great, but we try to share these experiences together. Well, thank you all for sharing. Really, there's a huge spectrum of deaf-blind. I have my own identity, and then we have, there's more privilege that's also there that's brought in the picture, and it can connect and relate to my experience on where I can recognize that. I have deaf family, but is this potentially a barrier when I'm working with more deaf-blind clients? Because they feel a connection with a deaf-blind person potentially, but there's sometimes still barriers even there. So the idea is looking at this oppression can be looked at very differently depending on where you're coming from. How we play a role in this oppression is something to recognize as well. And how do we moderate and become aware of that and get in tune with that? Because that's something, we do play a part in all of this. Okay, let's talk about unpacking as an oppressor. At first, I thought, no, I'm not an oppressor. That's my first thought. It sounds a little bit like difficult to look at. I looking at myself like, wow, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing, but it's easy for me to recognize oppression in others. I can say, oh, it's happening because I've experienced that and seen oppression occur, and I can try to help that person and work with that person if they did something wrong. But me myself, as who I am and what I do, and I know this field. I don't think I can be an oppressor, but the idea is that I can be. I understand that. I look at this and I try to understand the situation here. And how we play a part and how we host our own accountabilities, how we recognize it, become aware of it. That's important, and that's got to be constant. It's recognizing how we play a part in that oppression. What does that look like? How do I dress? Do I buy from expensive designer stores? I'm a professional, so I'm with my clients. Maybe my clients are struggling with that. They can't even get food or a drink. They're barely making it by on finances. Their oppression's there because there I am. You know, the idea is that does it look like I have time for them? How do they think of that part of it where I'm at? And the idea is that there's that whole idea that's just inside of you, and I haven't really even said anything yet. It's just a visual of who I am and what I look like and how I present myself in these meetings and presenting at workshops. How we stand or do we sit? How do we converse? How do we deal with larger audiences? How do we go with a survivor? How do we have conversations with the community in general? How do we really present ourselves is important. It's tough for me to present on this topic when I myself do some of these things. How do I own my own responsibility and recognize that? It's very impactful and influential in the healing process. I make mistakes. And how do I do this better? Sometimes I have a teammate or a coworker. Seeing if I make a mistake, that's fine. But how do I learn from that? How do I become transformative of myself to be more aware, a person with that awareness of what oppression I might assert on others? And what's oppressive and realizing what that is and be mindful of that and working with deaf, blind, deaf, disabled, and hard of hearing individuals and survivors. For example, I need to be mindful of how I dress. I have to be mindful of how I sign. Am I signing too fast? Am I overwhelming my clients? I did have one conversations, the idea is that, you want to connect, looking, oh, what's your connection? I sign so fast, I have deaf family. But the idea is I want to make sure I'm very clear. I want to sign slower. They go, oh, no, you're fine. You don't need to sign slow. I can sign faster. But the idea is that, want to make sure I was clear. How's the lighting in there based on their vision? I want to see myself, I think I'm doing well, but the idea is that, it's asking, do I look okay to you? Can you see me okay? Before I proceed, I don't want to oppress somebody. I want to check in, making sure I know what their needs are, making sure that they can be seen. Where do you want me positioned? Do you want me to be in a chair? Do you want me to, how do you feel? Do you want me to sit on the floor? That's fine. Which chair do you want to sit in? Where do you want to sit in the room? Do you want to sit over here? Some people laugh on that, and that's fine. But I try to be very mindful of my approach. Again, I know we're running close on time here, but I'd like to save some time here for the question and answer section. Oftentimes, it's common, the idea is, it's like you learn in psychology class. How do you defend yourself? And the idea is, oh, I'm not being defensive, or I didn't intend to be defensive. But really, um, if you want more interaction with our survivors and they want them to trust us, it's realizing that there's two things, and there's a difference of intent and impact. Okay? Let's look at the definition, the first bullet point here. The concept focuses on people with privilege. So it's looking at, for example, white, heterosexual, etc. There's a great video that I recommend you watch. It's a link that's on this page, and you should, we'll definitely share this with you, but please watch this link. It's a great, simple way of showing, what this concept looks like. And, I think we can, it's a great example I can give you when I grew up. I was wearing red, for example. He said, "Oh, it doesn't agree with your skin color." I said, "No, it's red. It's fine." They said, "Well, it doesn't really look, that's." So someone told me that. So I typically would use darker colors, and that seemed to agree with the skin color. Red being a good color. For example, pink or red does not agree with you, and that was, by my teacher. They told me that, and so let's say I said, "Oh, you actually hurt my feelings." Well, and the person says, "No, I didn't mean to. I was just trying to give you some, some. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I was trying to help you." And so that's something to be mindful of. I don't want to hurt somebody. I don't want to be oppressive. I don't want to create a microaggression. The idea is, you can be hurtful. And that's, it seems like a small thing because, obviously they didn't mean to hurt me per se, but the idea is that that's where it is. It did hurt me. And that's something to think about. and this, this has happened in other pieces, but please be mindful on how we generalize and or live our daily lives. Let's say, for example, did they make a hurtful comment, or you don't want to do that to people. You know, you want to be concerned of that. How do we interact with people? And I want to make sure we recognize that there are things that can be hurtful that maybe weren't intended to be so. If they said, "Oh, red's not good on you, you should wear black." For example, is that regarding my skin color? That's one of those things where that can reflect negatively potentially on that person in this conversation, and it's realizing that. Obviously, they didn't realize that, but that did happen. And again, adding deaf culture in the mix, there's a strong concept of blunt conversations. Oh wow, you put on 20 pounds. Wow, or you lost 20. Those things could be looked as being hurtful regarding body image issues. Someone's in their healing journey, for example. Maybe weight loss. You lost 20 pounds. There's a depression that's happening, and now you're applauding what is the person's experiencing depression, and you don't even realize it. But please be mindful on how we handle that and where oppression can occur, and being accountable for that and recognizing the impact. There's that idea of intent and impact, and you have a privilege, and how do we want to not get in the way of that? We want to have a deep conversation and dialogue and be more welcoming, at work and at home and in different situations. This is by understanding, that again, an impact and intent. So, how does everything connect? All oppression is connected. The idea is it's a power problem, and it's looking at this like a wheel, if you will, on how this all connects. There's hearing privilege, there's male privilege, there's a whole variety of different privileges, and there's oppression that occurs as well. So when a violence experience happens, that's a form of oppression. And then to really effectively reduce that, or to end the violence and oppression, the idea is looking at this as more of an umbrella. There's a whole different people's rights. We have to start to understand that we're advocating. We also understand that there's a whole variety of oppression. There's different isms and different communities that can be affected. There's a whole variety of things. And so some of you, are looking at this as, what's this connection here? But, we talked about what's this Facebook page talking about the LGBT community, for example. But, looking at what happened in Orlando, it's being supportive. How does that connect back to this divisive violent words? But the idea is that, there's oppression that's occurring. There's a connection, and oppressive is always connecting. You really have to look deeper to see all these connections, but they're there. For example, if you're looking at an oppressive situation, we see that oppression. If we can stop some of that, then that disconnection may occur, but that is a connected thing. We want to be effective and end and reduce violence. We have to work together and have an understanding on where this plays a part and how we play a part and how we can really change some of our understanding and how we can get this to go forward. And we can see some change here in other oppressive of experiences as well. But race, religion, gender, etc. There's so many things here. But all these tiny words that you can see in those colors around the word all, oppression is connected. But that all is a connected wheel. There are all these little words that connect. This is my last slide, but kind of food for thought. Some things you might want to consider at your agency. For example, as a form. We've changed our forms where we are. Where we were previously, we had name, gender with a checkbox. Male, female, pretty standard. Okay? We've changed that. It's name, birth name, what name do you prefer to be called, And what gender identity do you have? And it will say there's transgender, male, female, or other, and you can fill in your own, whatever you fits you. And which pronoun do you prefer used in your case? He, she, what do you prefer? Or other? You can fill that in. That's really one important piece that we have on our intake form. It's the very first impression we're providing. The idea of interacting with this agency, it's so important for us. But something to consider for you too. Can this be done? Can you make this change? Again, power control wheel. I've had some conflicts with this because the power control wheel does not fit for all deaf, deafblind, deaf, disabled, and hard of hearing individuals. There's very different semantics here and different power inequalities. We need to be very mindful of that, knowing that this does not apply to all. There's a whole control issue here and seeing if that fits. Does that happen in our community? Which is more? Do you need additional information? How can we control that or work that power wheel? And it's usually based on a straight couple or heterosexual couple. So that's something to be mindful of. How do we modify this information when we're explaining it to a person that has a different intersectionality? And what sorts of training are your staff required to receive? What kind of training? For us, we require that we have LBGT training. We have Hispanic, people of color. There's all these required trainings. Working with children. There's all these various trainings. It's not a one-time thing. We do this annually, and it's very, very thorough. What else is important to recognize is, what sort of collaborations do you work with? Do you work with other agencies that work with other races, other additional disabilities, mental health agencies, schools? You're working with a variety of different groups. So if you're partnering and working with them, it means that there's more likelihood of better service to that survivor. And let's look at this. What sort of policies or rules may your agency have that may overlook marginalized communities? What sort of information are we sharing and presenting on and discussing and dialoguing that may be considered oppressive? Kind of think that through. It can be discussed, of course, on this Q&A or afterwards. But again, it's something to think about. But as we have a dialogue on our next webinar. But I guess at this point in time, I want to open this up for questions. Tara would like to jump in, so let me let her jump in right now. Hold on. Okay, first of all, hold on, Malibu. Don't hang up yet. I want to see if there make sure there's any questions for you that since you're here. I think people are still thinking. They're digesting this. I myself am digesting this as well. Again, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your story, your experience. Again, helping us have a better understanding of violence and oppression. We cannot miss this important point if we want to work in this field. So thank you so much, Malibu. Well, again, thank you so much, and you're very, very welcome. Okay, this is Tara. After you drop off, I guess I'll kind of give you a little bit of the nuts and bolts of what's happening going forward. Okay, I see a comment saying, great presentation, really appreciate it. This is from Peggy. Okay, as you're thinking on this, maybe you want to have a discussion. I myself am too. Our next month's gathering will not have a webinar presentation, okay? We'll be offering small group dialogues and discussions. We'll call them a cohort discussion. This will be in July 21st at 1 o'clock. If you register beforehand, we can figure out how many people are available and registered, and we can then break you up into small groups. We're trying to do a max of 4 people tops with a variety of chat rooms. So we all can be on video with your group of 4 or so. We have this great technology. Again, it's not always perfect, of course. We have video issues and connection issues. We will look into this and experiment with different programs and different apps that may support multiple video types. We're looking at 4 to 5 people in a dialogue about this particular webinar we had today. So again, we'll send you questions beforehand you can think about. And as you get to their small teams, you can talk about that for an hour with other deaf service providers and advocates and counselors, etc., in this field. I guess what else do I want to mention here? Again, I'm very sorry about today's video quality being on and off. We'll continue to figure out how to make this better because obviously ASL is key. We're on a webinar here. This is really the first time that we've really experienced this, but oftentimes we typically go through hearing people who talk and call in. This is a signed first. So again, thanks for your patience with us. We will get this and find the best solution possible. If you know of a better technological solution, please share it with us. We'd love to hear it. Again, thank you so much for joining. We hope we see you next month for our group discussions. Again, thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye-bye. And here's some resources if you want additional information.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.